All right, so we're going to move on to the next learning targets of Unit 4, which is 3 through 5, sorry, which is going to deal with viruses all the way up to Protist, and then that will lead us into plants here very shortly. All right, so viruses. The big thing that's always asked with viruses is, are they alive? And we have to remember and remind ourselves what are some characteristics of life. So viruses do not meet several of the requirements to be considered living. Some of those are listed here. They do not have cells, they have no metabolism, and they do not grow. However, many people do consider them to be living or think of them as living because of how their life cycle operates. But the thing to keep in mind is that viruses cannot do these things on their own. They rely on a host cell. So the life cycle of a cell, an actual living thing, is what drives the, and I'm using air quotation marks with my fingers right now. You can't see it, but the life cycle of living cells is what drives the living idea of viruses. Okay, so without a host cell, viruses don't grow on their own. They don't reproduce on their own. They don't evolve on their own. They need the mechanisms of a host cell that is living in order for them to grow, replicate, adapt, mutate, all those things. So virus reproduction, okay, how it kind of works, and I'll talk about it here, and then we'll go into a picture here in a minute. So viruses are going to attach to a host cell. Viruses then inject their genetic information into that cell, and it becomes a prophage. All right, so a prophage is the name of a viral DNA inside of the host cell. The cell's machinery, or the cell's organelles, then replicate it. It takes it into its own genetic material, and when the cell goes through mitosis, it's going to replicate that genetic information. So that's the very interesting thing about viruses is once they inject their genetic information into a cell, that genetic information is then taken into the cell's existing genetic information, and that's a very pivotal point. And I again air quotes life cycle of a virus. So when the cell replicates that DNA or RNA, new viruses are assembled, and they continue to grow and they continue to build and they start taking over the cell. And once enough of these new viruses are made from the process of the normal life of a cell, that the virus is going to rupture or burst that cell, which kills that cell and releases a bunch of new viruses to go out and infect other cells. And then so you have this domino effect, and this starts over. And every time a cell ruptures and bursts, then more cells become infected, and then more, and then more, and then more. And then that's how we or other animals or plants get sick. So this is what, just a visual representation of what I just talked about. So if you want to pause the video here and put a picture drawing with those steps on the previous slide, feel free. All right, so virus shapes. You have three basic virus shapes. You have a helical, isohedral, and a bacteriophage. All viruses are going to be covered by a protective coating called a capsid. And that's an important vocab term for you to know. Okay, so a capsid, again, is a protective coating on viruses. Two different life cycles of a virus. You have the lytic and the lysogenic. So the lytic life cycle is when a virus is going through the steps that we just outlined a few slides ago. Okay, so when it's injecting genetic information into a cell, and the cell is replicating all that DNA and RNA or RNA, making new viruses. Okay, that's the lytic life cycle. Then you have a lysogenic life cycle. This is when a virus, for whatever reason, becomes dormant. And it can go through a long period of time where this virus is not active. And what we mean by active is it's within a body or it's within a living organism, but it's not attacking cells for whatever reason. And there's different things that cause this to happen. And then all of a sudden, some stimulus will cause this virus to become active, and it will begin transitioning into that lytic life cycle. Okay, so it's not uncommon to have a virus within you or an animal or a plant that's not showing any symptoms or signs. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, something stimulates it to start becoming active, is the way I think about it. So the lytic life cycle is an active virus. The lysogenic life cycle is kind of a passive, not active virus at that point in time, but can be at any point. All right, so vaccines. A vaccine is a dead virus, and again, dead is in quotations because in order to be dead, you must be living. So, you know, a vaccine is a weakened or dead virus. It's one that is not as potent as a actual virus. It's kind of been altered a little bit. And this is going to teach your immune system to fight the real virus. Okay. So antibiotics do not work on viruses because the majority of them interact with the cell walls of bacteria. Viruses do not have a cell wall. So, antibiotics don't typically take care of viruses. Now, teaches your immune system. Okay. That's in quotation marks as well, because once your body is amazing. Most living bodies are amazing. Once they've been exposed to something, they typically prepare themselves to keep that from happening again. And that's the idea behind vaccines, is to expose a body or a living organism to something that could make it very sick, but we do it under a controlled environment to prepare the body to make these antibodies and these immune response system to a particular virus to keep it from making a body extremely sick. All right, so now we're moving to protists. And so we're moving away from prokaryotic cells and we're moving into eukaryotic cells. So a protist is any eukaryotic cell that is not a fungi, plant, or animal. Now, you'll have fungi-like protists, you'll have plant-like protists, you'll have animal-like protists, but they are not fungi, plant, or animal. These are, a little bit more simple um, organ or cells, a lot of times single cell, um, but they do have a lot of those membrane-bound organelles. Right, so animal-like protists, protists that have characteristics similar to that of animal cells. So some different ones, you have the zooflagellates, which swim using a flagella. This right here is going to be a zooflagellate. You have the saccharidines, which are amoebas, and they use a pseudopodia. Remember, pseudopodia is a false foot. You have ciliates, which move using cilia, little tiny hair-like projections. And then you have sporozoans, and they do not move on their own, and these are parasites. Okay, so what mosquitoes carry is an example of sporozoans that make us sick. Okay, any type of parasite that can get inside of an organism to make it sick. So those are animal-like protists. Then you have plant-like protists that produce their own food using photosynthesis. Algae and diatoms are examples of plant-like protists. Algae and diatoms are very interesting organisms. You could spend a lot of time classifying and studying algae, which is not uncommon to do around here. Diatoms, it can be done around here, but typically more so in saltwater environments. But very, very interesting organisms that behave like plants, but they are a little different in complexity. Then you have your fungi-like protists, and these are heterotrophs. So remember what heterotrophs are, that absorb nutrients from dead material. Slime molds are examples of fungi-like protists. The little jelly-looking snot ball is a slime mold. All right, last slide. Protist reproduction. Okay, protists reproduce both asexually and sexually. So many protists reproduce asexually. And we'll talk more about asexual reproduction when we get to genetics. Sexual reproduction, some protists do go through meiosis and produce gametes or sex cells in order to sexually reproduce. So most protists go through a parent splits into two daughters by itself. There are some protists that produce sex cells, sperm and egg, and you have sexual reproduction. And that is the end of Learn the Targets 3 through 5. So be sure you complete the form that goes with this. If you have questions, let me know.